to say a little bit more about the mind and how attention and the mind are different. So when we're thinking, there's the useful kinds of thoughts that are practical in nature and that don't cause us to suffer, and then there's the 98% of the other kind of thinking. But thinking is not, those are not sort of our only two options. We have another capacity that's inherent to us, and it's inherent to that in us that can simply be aware. Simply see. And that's what I call attention. It's, a person can think, I can suppose, that anytime there's any kind of awareness going on, it's thinking. And that actually is not the case. And part of the value of looking at this for yourself is, people get into this, spiritual seekers get into this thing of saying, oh well, there's certain stuff I don't have access to because I'm not awake. It's the worst possible thing you could ever tell yourself. The whole point of this is that it is our nature. It's just that we don't experience ourselves as that, at least not steadily, most people. So realize that it is this it that we all seek to know or to experience life as is already here. And that's not just a thought, or maybe it is just a thought, but it's important to, even if all you're carrying of that is a remembered thought, remind yourself of it periodically, because otherwise you'll tell yourself, first I have to accomplish X, Y, and Z before I'll be able to, and that's part of what keeps us missing it, that idea. So attention, and you all know this, you all have experienced this. When something gets your attention, like the shoe under the bed, or like an aria that you're listening to that's, everything else falls away, or you're singing it, everything else is gone. Or you're suddenly seeing your newborn baby for the first time. Or you just come upon a horrible accident. It's not just good, pleasant stuff. Anytime anything completely has your attention and you've forgotten everything else, you're not thinking. When you're driving a race car, or climbing a mountain, icy mountain, and every single gesture of your body could be your death if you're not really paying attention, and all of attention, or you're painting, doing some creative something, where your ego isn't busy assessing is it any good, or you're digging a hole in the ground to plant seeds, you're fishing, whatever, it doesn't matter, grand, positive, what we call negative, doesn't matter. When all of your attention is with something, or you're listening to somebody speak, and there's a great stillness in you, there's no momentum, there's no movement, there's no trying to figure out or grasp or anything, you're just with it, you're just aware. That's attention. It's not thinking. The ability to attend yourself in the moment. Okay? Let awareness flood it. Simply observe what's going on in here, that there's thinking going on, the kinds of emotions the thoughts are causing, simply to attend body sensation, whatever it is. The ability to let attention be what you observe yourself with, as opposed to egoic thinking, is massively liberating. If you're thinking about yourself, you're not going to get anywhere but pain. It's just about guaranteed. So what I'm really inviting you to do is to, because of the kinds of experiences I described, where you can recognize in your own experience, you've had many, many episodes of rapt attention in your life, especially when you were a child. We all know what that felt like, to not experience time as a real thing. That's it, there's something important going on there. So when attention is what's enlivened, is being allowed, it's the spaciousness in you that's capable of that. It's not thought. Those are very different modes of knowing. The thinker processes. It's got investment in certain things. It cares how things turn out. Very much cares. It needs to have labels for things and all of that. Attention just looks utterly neutral. It's not afraid to look at anything. It's not afraid. Yeah.
So if you're doing, let's say you're going to take a big trip or something, and you have 101 things that you have to plan for in advance to take this trip. While you're in the middle of doing all these things which require your brain to have all these logical thoughts, can you be doing that and be in attention simultaneously?
Oh my God. What a relief. Yes, you can. Because what you're paying, when attention is being paid, it can be paid only to the immediate. It is a function of presence.
So you're paying attention to what you're thinking about?
No, you're paying attention to what you're doing. So if I have a list, a physical list or a list in my head, let's say it's a list in my head, that I have to turn on the thinker to visit. So I know what's the next thing I'm going to do. While I'm actually doing the thing I'm doing now, I don't have to keep going over and over that or looking at the physical list. I'm just doing the thing I'm doing, and I'm at rest, and I'm doing it really well. When it's done, then I look at the list in my head or on a piece of paper and say, okay, now what? Now, somewhere along there, previously, there was the necessity to make the list, to anticipate, think, what are the steps, what are the things I need to do blah, blah, blah. Of course, and in that moment, there's useful thinking going on. That's not, well, probably pain-inducing if you're thinking, I'll never have enough time, I'll never get it all. But it's possible to generate the list without that self-attention. Truly it is. Something in us says, I have to keep the whole thing in my head all the time. I have to be constantly anticipating, or it'll somehow never get done. That has to be questioned. It's madness. That only makes us suffer. The ego insists that it's necessary. Oh my God, let yourself discover what it's like to get through the list while doing one thing at a time. And, pure attention. And you'll do each thing that you do better than you would have. Truly. It's all about attention, really. I'm so glad you brought this up, because attention really just is about the immediate. You can't put attention on anything else. In order for you to, you have to turn on the thinker. You have to visualize the situation or anticipate the thing that's coming, and then you're thinking. Yes.
Could you speak about multitasking?
Oh.
When you've got the pot of tea brewing because you're going to drink tea, but you need to get the bag ready to get out the door, and so you've got 4 or 5 things going on at once. And
Yeah, I think you could speak about it. Why don't you keep going?
yeah, well, there's a heightened awareness when you have a lot of things to do. That they're all, you don't lose them. I don't know exactly why that is.
Do you mean the ability to keep a lot of balls in the air at once?
Yeah.
To stay multiply aware
Yeah.
of things?
To remember the pot of tea boiling while you're doing something else. And then, I kind of love that mode, but sometimes it can get me off track. But I like the mode of being at the heightened awareness to move and remember that and that and that and that, and there's that open attention that seems to be able to allow more than one thing at a time.
Yeah. It's a very tricky business, though. I know what you're talking
It is
about.
a tricky business.
My sense of that, in my own experience, is my ability to do what you're describing is extremely time limited. And I'll do it only when it's truly necessary. Mostly I find that if I try to multitask, I lose something. I don't know whether I turned off the kettle. It's a sure sign to me that I wasn't conscious when I turned off the kettle. if I suddenly don't know whether I did or not. So to me, what I get instruction from this all the time. I say, no, you really can't do that. Now, I do know what you mean. I think when there's true necessity, like in a, say in kind of an emergency, or when there's a risk of burning the house down if you lost track of something. I do think in short bursts, it's possible to, like when something happens out of the blue, like the dog got loose, and I've also got to pay attention to the car that's rolling down the hill. I can, but it's only got to be really, truly necessary. Otherwise, I will not do it. And I used to pride myself on multitasking. And something in us thinks there's so much to do, we have to. Oh, you might as well hang yourself on it.
Sometimes, if you can be conscious that there's a flow happening, you're in a flow, and it's moving, and there's something about it that's actually working, but often it's not a flow, and it's more like you burn yourself, something happens that throws you off, and then you're like, if I hadn't been doing such and such at the same time. Yeah, every once in a while I will catch a flow happening, but that's not very frequent.
It's not the norm, yeah. I think there is such a thing as having, and I think maybe this is what you're touching on, Susan, having heightened alertness, receptivity, ready to respondness kind of thing, where if something comes into your awareness, you're not focusing your attention in a given direction, so there is a, readiness. But it has to be the kind of thing where data is going to come here. It's like, not that I have to remember to go looking, but there will be a sound of a kettle, or the dog will.
I also notice that when I'm doing that, when I turn the kettle on, I need to be really present. I am now turning,
Yes.
instead of thinking about the next thing
Oh,
that I'm
yes.
going to do. So in
Then
a
you'll
way,
remember you
really,
did
I
it.
am still doing one thing at a time,
Yeah,
but kind of holding them all
The
in
general.
one.
yeah.
So I'm just noticing that for me, there's a graceful quality when I know I'm doing one thing, and yet I'm being really present to everything else that's going on. So tea is a great example, because I go to the kitchen and I start to make tea. Now, the way I think of it is, I'm stuck in the kitchen waiting for the tea to boil. Now, obviously I could leave, but now I'm present to the fact that I'm in the kitchen, so I end up, cleaning up for my kids. Do you see what I mean? But I'm not doing that. I'm really making tea. And I notice that when I get stressed or into my head is when I forget that what I'm really doing is making tea, which is actually in the middle of, let's say, writing or something else that I'm doing. And I suddenly think I'm cleaning the kitchen, right? And now the tea is ready, sitting on the counter, and I'm still cleaning the kitchen. And I'm like, wait a minute, something's off. But if I'm really doing one thing, I'm not really doing two things. That way you said, being present to inputs, like that I'm not thinking about the other thing, I'm more responding to what I'm aware of in the room that's present.
Yeah, it's receptivity. So, we'll have time all day long for stuff to get exchanged. So, you say, sometimes you might visit this question for yourself. Why, if I'm fundamentally at peace, and if my fundamental nature is absolutely unresisting, aware spaciousness, peaceful, if that's my fundamental nature, how come I don't feel that way all the time? And the ego will say, oh, well, it's because it's not your fundamental nature. Because first you have to do all these other things, But you mustn't take that as an answer. Although it's good to see that that's there. Whatever the ego has come up with as a way of accounting for the imperfection that's ongoing. So the reason that we don't experience ourselves as that, and that life doesn't feel that way all the time, is that something else, that some other apparent self feels real, and, more real, you could say. And we ourselves manufacture that self. We maintain it, we lavish attention on it, we take it seriously as being what we are. The fundamental difference between awake and not awake is, where is your actual identification of yourself? What do you actually feel like? So earlier when I said, what comes to you when you say I, what does that mean to you? What's the feeling? Where is it located? What do you identify with as being you? What changes in awakeness, momentary or not momentary, is that the identification has shifted. So where you literally, not just as an idea, that's useless, but your actual sense of what you are has shifted from the personality with the issues and desire and fear to what you actually experience yourself as being is something like space, emptiness, presence, awareness. And we're not necessarily in charge of what causes the identification to shift. Alas. We're really not in charge of it. I mean, that was a gross understatement. But we can do lots and lots and lots and lots to support the process of it occurring. The primary thing being, it's like every time the egoic self, the ego is not a dirty word, even though, we talk about it. I've been talking about it as if it's nothing but a troublemaker. Oh, of course it is, but in some way it functions even when awakeness is the primary experience. It's just that you no longer confuse it with what you really are. So while you are confusing it with what you really are, which is the human way, it's what we do, it's what we're all taught to do, it's wonderfully productive to observe when it's actually underway, actual momentary life. What it's doing to, like how it can tell it's there. How does it, when it feels injured, when it feels threatened or angry or defensive or, to see that for what it is. Not in a guilty, embarrassed, oh my God, I'm such a loser kind of way. It's just as a phenomenon, neutrally. Observe it functioning. What we normally do is we occupy it. It's like a play that's going on or a skin that's there, and we step into the skin and live within it as if that's what we are. That's what identification means. And then it's impossible to see it functioning. But it's always, because we have attention as part of our capacity, that neutral, simple awareness of seeing what's occurring, it's always possible for us to observe what the ego is doing right now, just as a phenomenon. Not wishing it were different, not judging it, not trying to change it, anything like that. Simply observing it. Now, in order for the egoic self to keep itself going and continue to feel like who we really are, and this is just a way of understanding this. There are many ways, but this is a way that makes sense to me. There are three things that have to continue to seem real for the ongoing identification of the person as being what we are, to maintain itself. Okay. One of them is time. Time has to seem real, like, you know what I mean by time. The past has to feel in some way as real as the present moment. The possible, dreaded, or hoped for future has to have the quality of the real. So time has to keep seeming real in order for this identification to be ongoing. Another thing that has to have the quality of the real is thought. That we equate our thoughts with reality. We mix up something here with what's actually occurring in the immediate, livable, discernible moment. And the other thing is me, the sense of self, that the mind presents for our consideration, who you seem to be. That has to keep seeming real. Those three things I picture like a three-sided pyramid. Now, pyramid actually has 4 sides, but, I mean in the sense that the three, think of these things as a solid, or as a structure, a stable structure. And the sides touch, they depend upon each other. And, it's like when we're caught up, in unconsciousness, we are inside that thing. If any one of those three things, if something occurs in your awareness to cause the real seemingness of any one of those things to not be able to hold up anymore, your sense of time, your sense of who you are, and the apparent reality of your thoughts, if any one of those things falls, the other two will not be able to hold themselves up. There will be a fundamental something can't hold itself together anymore. Now, so your sense of yourself, we talked earlier about, when you think about who I am, in order for you to get access to that in any way but the direct, immediate sensation of beingness, you can say, you have to go into thought. You have to go into your mind to revisit what you know about yourself, to remember significant life experience, to revisit what your present life experience is. You have to think. That's not something attention has access to. It involves memory. So your whole sense of yourself depends upon your ability to remember who you are, what's happened in your life, what your name is, really fundamental things, what your sexual orientation is, what your beliefs are, spiritual and political and all that. If you couldn't remember, if you couldn't go into your thinker and revisit those kinds of things, you have a really hard time knowing who you are in the familiar way. You see that? So your sense of yourself, everything that's happened that's made you into who you are, happened before now. All of it. Every single scrap of it. So you have to believe in, time has to be something to you besides just a thought. You have to, when you revisit your history, it has to have a feeling of the real in some way. You can sort of re-enter it. That's what memory feels like when it's important memory. So you see how all of these things depend upon each other. When you have a moment of pure awareness, when something happens, and some people have this once in their lives, some people never have it. But when, for whatever reason, like it might come from out of left field, when you suddenly have this profound all is well knowing, and all of your so-called problems are just nowhere to be found. There's utter stillness there. What people will say afterwards is that time stopped. Time never started. It sure doesn't look that way. All of our experience tells us, we look at succession, things happen in an order, there's causality, we understand history, we look at geologic change and all that. But the direct experience of any moment of life is just now. Everything rememberable happened in some stillness. It's only when the mind assembles it that it perceives flow, that it can look at, cause and effect and all that. So when attention senses itself, and this is why it could not be boring, it's sensing itself. It's enough. It doesn't have to have content. It doesn't need content. And if you've had this experience, and if you revisit what did it feel like, or what, was there movement there? Were you thinking about before and after? It's stillness, it's utter stillness. So time literally doesn't exist except when you think. And the ego and the mind, certainly, do not know what to do with that. It's okay. You don't have to figure it out. The mind will never understand it. Don't ask the mind to do what it's not equipped to do. A lot of the frustration in spiritual circles comes of trying to use the wrong organ, the wrong, not organ, but capacity, faculty. Yeah. It's like, don't ask the mind to understand this. You're not going to talk the mind out of itself. Just like the ego's not going to talk itself into dying. Never will happen. Yeah.
What's the difference between the mind and the ego?
Well,
Is it one thing?
no,
No.
but the ego uses the mind for its purposes. So the mind is really good at visualizing something that's not in the immediate scene, something that happened before, something that could happen, or something that's imagined to be occurring elsewhere but not directly perceivable. The mind is really good at doing that, and we're making a story about something, and then it seems real. So the ego gloms onto that capacity to worry, to feel good about, to try to get its bearings and get security going somehow. So the mind is really, truly wonderful at all that stuff. It's just that it gets abused by the ego. So when the ego stops functioning in that way, then the mind is able to just be its really good, clear-thinking self, figuring out problems, planning for a trip, whatever.
So, could be, the mind can be used by the self, the true self or whatever it is, or the mind can be run by the ego?
Yeah. It's not inherently bad at all.
It
It's just
is.
powerful. It's really powerful. It does what it does because it can. And we let it. And we suffer. Yeah.
Yeah, but the mind, I mean, the ego is a construct of the mind, right? I mean, it's been created by the mind. It's not, it doesn't even exist in a sense. It's just a, right? I mean,
Yeah.
isn't it just a kind of a fiction that's been created, but we take it as,
It's an elaborate plot.
yeah, okay,
Yeah.
thanks, yeah.
Yeah. Which is why that thing that I'm saying is like a three-sided pyramid. If thinking couldn't occur, the sense of who we are, the ordinary familiar way, couldn't hold itself up.
Right,
It does not exist. And when you look at that from the point of view of the ego, it's like panic. It feels like death or like danger. It's the last thing we want to have happen is that we cease to be. Yeah.
So that time stop moment, is that the mind? Where's the mind when the time stops?
It's not functioning. It's attention. The mind, when thinking is occurring, there's a feeling of movement, direction, all of that. And if it's egoic thinking, there's discomfort probably. But in that kind of a moment when we sense that time stopped, it's just attention.
So attention is not a function of mind.
Oh, well, I don't know.
Oh, okay.
That's
Okay,
But it's not a function of the normal
yes.
mind as we think of it. As we think of it. Yeah.
I know this is a silly question, but if somebody has amnesia, that doesn't mean they're enlightened, but they have no memory.
You could say they just got depending on how they orient to it, they just got a little boost.
Some people with Alzheimer's are in perpetual heaven and others are in perpetual hell.
Yeah, yeah. It's no. The only usefulness of those things were like the Jill Bolte Taylor, the brain scientist with the left hemisphere, the right. People try to glom onto that and make a lot of that too, but it can be useful as just simply as a way of seeing that the things we take for granted as inevitable or as part of the setup for what keeps the ego going or for what ends up in freedom are, there's a lot more to it than what we typically assume is the case. Oh,
I work making art with kids, and it's in a school, and the bell rings, and oftentimes the bell rings, and you're like, oh my God, an hour just went by, and everybody has clay out everywhere, and you don't even realize, and they go, that was an hour? I thought it was a minute,
yeah.
because we're constantly interacting without, responding, not thinking about it.
Just, is the mind like a big M? Is it something we all tap into? Or is it more of an individual thing?
The big M mind, can you see it in your
Yeah, it's just like, I don't know what I'm trying to ask.
What you mean by the collective?
Yeah,
A
I guess.
collective
Is
awareness.
it something we all kind of tap into? Or is it very much an individual?
Oh, I don't know. It is haywire when I look at that.
Yeah.
I think, what comes to me is that there's only so much that thinking about this can get us to. But also what comes to me is that thing that I'm calling attention is something that we have in common. We all have it. And, so could you say, is it one whole big thing that we all sort of participate in or draw from? I don't know. I don't know. I don't want to say that because I don't know. So, let's shut your eyes if you want. And let come into your awareness something from your past. It could be recent or long ago, doesn't matter. That was very painful to you. Some harm that came to you, some great loss, great fear, physical pain. So right now your mind is, you're using your mind to reach back and look for something, remember it. So let yourself recollect that situation or that moment to your awareness. And to the extent that it's possible from this distance, revisit how it felt. Without mentally handling it or getting into story about it, just let your body remember the feeling of that great sorrow or loss or terror or bewilderment, whatever it was, just sit with that. Feel it. Be vulnerable to yourself here. Don't be cautious. Allow it. Go back there. Be that person again. Never mind who you are now or what you've learned since. Let your heart break, or whatever was happening there. Just feel it. Don't protect yourself. And if there's a story associated with it, revisit the story too. Let come whatever came in the aftermath of it. However you coped, however you went on with your life. Let that remind you of itself as well. So open your eyes, and so what I'd like us to do is turn and face someone that you're near that you don't know. Just turn, if you're in chairs or can actually face each other, please do that, and then I'll tell you the next thing.
Jill.
If somebody needs, if there's a leftover person, I'll be the other, if that happens. You know what I mean by leftover?
Okay.
Kelly?
My mother was acting very crazy and I confronted her about it. My father would just think of these pictures. And I realized how it was. So I just separated from her actually.
Notice what's going on in you right now.
She was sort of
Whatever it is, wondering, thinking you know, whatever.
Just
Blah, blah, blah. Just notice it.
it was very, very scary.
So, just for a little bit here, just be with this person and look into one another's eyes. Silently, please. Except I'll say it a little. Notice what it feels like inside you as you look into this person's eyes. Without your mind, just the feeling of it. Allow whatever is there to be there. Don't push away anything. Just notice. And if thoughts want to come in about this person or about you, just notice that they're there. Let yourself be seen. Let yourself see. Don't push anything away. Don't manage it. If there's discomfort, just see that it's there. If there's relief, these are just words. Don't hold anything away. There's room for whatever you're feeling. What I'd like us to do is each person in turn, and I'm gonna, I'll keep awareness of the time. Each person take 2 minutes, and I'll ring the gong at the end of 2 minutes, so you don't have to worry about paying attention yourself to time. During your time to speak, share about what that thing was when I invited us to revisit something painful from the past. Tell about it. In the fullest, by fullest, I don't mean necessarily all the details, I mean the most real, true, honest expression of the actual feeling that you can. And let yourself, as you speak, if you notice you're holding away, let yourself let go and get deeper and truer to the extent you're able. And the person who's listening, just be there for it. Just listen. Please don't respond. You're just a witnessing presence. And then I'll ring the gong and then we'll pause and then the other person, then we'll reverse, we'll switch. Okay, you follow?
allow my dad. Remembering what I said, so I got up and went upstairs to check in with my husband. Really, and my husband's response kind of angered, why did you say this? And I remember feeling very happy. But then like, I really needed to come in. So I just went back to call her. And then I told my son that time, he decided he was going to and then she tried to kill herself too. And then, even something could be so unsettling. Like, it all just seemed like, it just seemed like such a big of a lot of different uncomfortable things. And almost like there was a part of me that was trying to stay to feel that feeling, but also just kind of watch it and not, like, not just feeling angry at my husband. It's just this really frustrating position where my dad is very much of a and awakening. I mean, I don't think it's clear right now.
So wherever you were is enough. So just look at one another again. In the awareness of what you just heard or what you just said. Let yourself just be space in which this that's occurring is occurring. You don't have to know what to think about your own story or the other person's, or you don't have to be anticipating what you might be about to say. Just let yourself be still and aware. This person into whose eyes you're looking was once an infant, as you were, and will die as you will. and has suffered as you have. The difference is, it appears so important or minor. So now the other person can speak.
He said I could pray for what do you mean? What's wrong with it? So in essence, we started to encourage his sister and I got mad at said something to his sister, my wife is just, and then he finished I agreed to say something we both have but I haven't seen this range of him for a long time. Very, very loud. And I like to very do this. I left the original student. Heard him just be curious. And the whole thing just made me so incredibly sad. We haven't had many surveys by and my body two people that love her so much. It's very
So, just be with what you just said or what you just heard. And look into this person's eyes and let them see you. There's a life's worth of so much in those eyes. Just as in your eyes, whatever facade we put up or all the putting on a certain kind of face, it's all there in our hearts and shows when we let ourselves be seen. We're not so different from each other. Don't be afraid of yourself, of the other. find yourself wishing it would be over, it's like wishing your life would hurry up and end. It takes guts to live. Really live. So maybe go back and say how you were before. However you want.
Well, I think that was good with the peers. We wouldn't have made it 2 minutes, we would have been, sorry. We would have been, yeah.
Please come back so we're together. You may have just been on the receiving end of an opening, a revelation that you wouldn't typically be on the receiving end of with a stranger, or maybe anybody. And you may never see this person again. But if you do, you'll at least see this person again more today. And they will see you. And I just want to say, let's sit whatever just happened. It's not something to necessarily revisit together unless you both indicate a willingness to do that. But please don't assume that it's okay to, or certainly to share it with anybody else. So what I want to ask you to do is see how when you were telling your story, when you were re-entering it, the feeling of it, and remembering the story about it, how painful it was, the degree to which that felt like what you really are. It's like the things that define us, that we hold to, that we bring up when we're introducing ourselves to someone that we want to, like you're becoming intimate with somebody. I don't mean like what just happened necessarily, but you're becoming close to someone, forming a friendship, becoming partners, lovers or something. And you become increasingly vulnerable to the other person. And there's a story they need to know about you if they're going to really know you. And when you find yourself deeply trusting or a new friend, these are the kinds of things you come out with. It's like, they need to know this about me if they're going to really know me. Those kinds of things. See how impossible it is to believe that there's something of me that isn't that. This kind of thing is a way of seeing how we're so attached to especially painful life experience that we can't imagine not being defined by that thing. The difficulty of imagining that there's something here that never was touched by that experience. Not in a way of denial, not in a way of having healed from it, but that there's something in us that's never been touched by any experience we've ever had. Look at the utter, like, doesn't that make something go haywire? How could that be? So this structure that holds itself together, where we believe our thoughts, time seems real. What I seem to be is the accumulation of all my experience and my physical features and all of that. Do you see how? And then you wonder why why don't I experience myself as sweet, empty, ease, spaciousness? So, you know, it's not like then the task becomes talk yourself out of the past mattering. Talk yourself out of the shaping influence your difficult history had. You can't. You know, it's happened. Here it is. We are what we are. You know, we have become what we've become because of all that. But the useful thing to do is see how deep all that stuff goes. It's not trying to change it, but be willing to see how it gives us a sense of solidity, a sense of a self moving through time, needing to be taken care of and maintained and protected and put in a good light and all of that. The willingness to simply see how solid all of that feels, that willingness to see whatever is operating is the doorway to finding out what's beyond it, to discovering the space in you that's beyond all of it. So don't be afraid of your life. Don't be afraid of your deep feelings. Don't be afraid of the pain that you can still feel because of your current whatever and also the history. You know, the willingness to feel the depth of all those things and to allow it without judging it and without trying to change it is the very thing that suddenly makes you aware of the space that's around it all. That is what you more deeply are. You're not trying to manage yourself out of existence. You're not trying to get hold of the ego and wrestle it into submission. It's a matter of recognizing what's occurring, what's in your awareness. See the thoughts and how tenacious they are. See how real they are, how they want to keep drawing you back into their real seemingness. Just observe it occurring. It's ongoing. Every instant you live, something's happening. You're alive. It's a fact. Something's going on. Something's coming at you in the way of life. You're participating in it, observing it, whatever you're doing it. Something is happening right now. Something's going on in your awareness. To the extent that you're willing to flood whatever it is with awareness, with attention, absolutely willing, not pushing anything away, not avoiding it, not trying to manage it, not trying to understand it, not putting a good spin on it. Just let it be. It's phenomenon. Observe it. And the next thing you know, there's more out there. And that's what you are. Always have been. Life will still be ongoing during, really, now this is real life when you go out to lunch.